Welcome, everybody, to this is the General and Housing Committee. And today is the 13th. Today, 14th. Today is the 14th of January, 2026. And we are continuing at the moment our initial hearing, which are addressing the issue of sort of a broad look at our legislation, past and present and future. What is working? What is not working? What direction should we choose to go? And this morning, our first witnesses are from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, or VNRC. Are two of you going to testify at the same time?
That's okay.
Yeah, just grab that chair and put it next to the other.
Maybe you should take the main, sit up into the summit show, really. It's easy to see.
I'll go first and then jump. I'm gonna share some slides if that's okay.
Okay, why don't you, we'll go, you get your slide set and then for the record, give us your name, et cetera.
My name is Katie Gallagher. I direct the Sustainable Communities Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
And I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director with VNRC.
So as folks might know, VNRC is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. We work on a variety of different natural resource topics. And one of those areas is sustainable communities, which I help to manage. And Sustainable Communities Program is really focused on how we build and use our land. And the way that we think about that is really kind of from a two-sided land use approach. So one side is where we should be developing, where we should be growing our communities, building our homes. And the other side of that is where we should be having our open lands for farming, for forests, for natural resources. And that's not to say that those are two totally distinct things, but it's when we talk about housing, it's very much an environmental issue for us. And so that's why we are very appreciative to be invited in today to talk about how we feel like we're doing for housing as an environmental and a climate solution. So for a little bit of background, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but just to give a sense of where we have been coming at this issue from. Where we grow matters just as much as kind of how and how much. So it's not just about the number of homes, but where those homes are located, as well as the types of homes. This is a graphic from a VTrans study a couple of years ago. From, again, the environmental perspective, this is showing that where we grow matters because it is a source of climate pollution. Transportation from sprawling development accounts for 40%, the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's an important component there, but it also matters significantly in terms of affordability. This is a two side-by-sides of my town of Waterbury, looking at the Waterbury downtown, and our other village center in Waterbury Center, which is where I live. It's only less than 2 miles from the downtown, but it has much larger, lots of land, less homes, less infrastructure. And you can see that because it requires us to have more cars and maintain those cars, it's almost $7,000 more annually in transportation costs. So when we talk about housing as an affordability issue, it really matters that we're also thinking about where those homes are located because of these additional costs. So obviously that we're having this conversation because we need more homes, and that is obvious for a variety of different reasons. And I don't think I need to tell you all about what those reasons are. The good news is that we are building off of some pretty strong bones here in the state. We, for better or for worse, haven't grown into kind of suburbia sprawl like a lot of other states. We have this historic settlement pattern of these village downtown areas that are surrounded by our rural countryside or farms or forests. And that remains our statutory planning goals, that remains in our town zoning goals as well. And so that's kind of where we are launching off from. But it's been really hard to achieve these goals. Part of where we are coming from is that, yeah, we've had these goals, we've had a lot of investment, and still it's been really difficult. And I know that you all have heard about the variety of different reasons why it's been so difficult to build housing, from labor shortages and materials. Some of those pieces that are more within our control is the fact that we made it illegal to build a lot of the types of homes that you would see in this graphic here, these relatively small, whether it's a duplex or 4-unit building, even a small apartment building, adding on an ADU for many, many years, our local and our state land use laws made this not possible. So I think it's important to recognize that that's kind of this place where we are starting from, is that it, until recently, has not been possible in many of our towns to build even a 2-family home, let alone, a 20-unit apartment building. I also want to point out that this is a kind of cultural issue, that when we talk about NIMBYism is one piece of it, but also this is a poll from a couple years ago now that I think about a lot, which says that 3/4 of Americans, but I'm sure it's very similar for Vermont too, believe that it's better for the environment if homes are built farther apart. And you can kind of imagine why we might think that. And of course, we all, being Vermonters, love being able to, maybe see deer out of our window and go walk down to the pond. But it is true that it is actually better for the environment when homes are built closer together, but we're kind of stuck in this place of more homes, more density is going to be bad potentially for our communities because we don't want those people here, or it's bad for our environment because there might be more pollution or more buildings, it's going to block our view, et cetera. So again, we are kind of going against the cultural momentum here. So when we make it illegal and we undermine public investments and make it so that we envision everybody needs to have, 5 to 20 acres of their own, we end up with downtowns that have lost their investments, that undermines our local businesses. It also means that we have fewer homes because, again, when every home requires X amount of land, we only have so much buildable land to begin with. So that's going to result in less homes. Those homes are going to be more expensive. You're going to require people to have to drive, and all of those things make it pretty expensive. And so just another note, I guess, before I get to that piece of it, this again is really an affordability issue. These homes being placed further out, again, going back to why it matters where we build, it means that you have, unfortunately, larger and larger homes. Going back to the cost of housing, we're not building those small starter homes anymore. So now you have more home to take care of, you have higher heating and cooling costs, you have those car costs, our property taxes are going up because now we've built out, our towns are required to have more extensive and expensive infrastructure. And ultimately, those lower density homes can't pay back those costs that municipality is now spending. If anybody's familiar with the organization Strong Towns, they call this the growth Ponzi scheme, where essentially we're tricking ourselves into thinking that we can continue to sprawl out and pay for it through our municipalities when we can't. And just another note that we have even more pressing affordability and municipal funding challenges with the cost of climate and healthcare and education and all of these things. So we cannot afford to continue to build out in this way. So getting to the good news, and I know that you all have heard some of this overview already this session. Starting with the Home Act in 2023, I won't go into all the details because I think that you've heard many of them. But this was a really significant piece of legislation. When you look across the country at the highlights of what states are doing to address housing, the things that we did in the Home Act and Act 181 are those things. Vermont has been a leader in this way where we are re-legalizing, again, making it legal to build the type of housing that we see in these pictures below. Some of these are new, like in the case of Fairleigh. Some of these are not new, but in many cases, you know, if you were to go look at any given Vermont downtown and say, do our zoning bylaws allow for this to be built today? The answer would be no. And so the Home Act made those changes for municipal zoning to say, at the very least, these lower unit multifamily homes need to be allowed where we have existing infrastructure. And I can go into more detail if folks have questions, but this second piece, again, so going up more to the state level land use, we made those changes at the municipal level. Act 181 in 2024 brought it up a level. We talk a lot about the impact and the modernization of Act 250, but I think just as importantly, we need to talk about the changes made to the state designation program and the changes made to the regional and municipal planning process. And that overall, this package really overhauled our planning framework as a state. And just to touch on the history of Act 250 for a second, Act 250 as a regulatory system was built with the intention of having a land use map that accommodated it. And we quickly got rid of that. And so we've been doing Act 250 for all of these years without that map to help guide the growth and conservation. And so part of what we were able to do with Act 181 and the updates to regional and municipal planning is bring back that mapping component, but also really do it from the ground up and say, communities, where do you want to be prioritizing growth in your towns? And that's what we refer to now as the Tier 1 areas. And I think it's also important to talk about which tools we need for which communities. Not all of our communities are going to benefit from the same tool, and Act 250 is not the thing that will help all of our communities. So for our smallest towns, really, I think that the biggest benefit that we're getting is through some of the changes that were made to the state designation program, where many of our smallest village centers are being automatically brought into the process. They've simplified it and made it easier so that towns can go kind of up this step ladder, and DHCD can provide more information about those details. But that's providing the technical and financial assistance needed for towns to do a lot of the work that would get them external investment for housing. Whereas right now, you know, we're struggling to get housing investments even in our larger towns.
Forgive my ignorance on this, but does it mean that like a town that isn't in Tier 1, but's in Tier 2 could become a village, could create a village center?
Yes, yep, absolutely.
And that's under existing law?
Yes, that is, so there was the existing state designation program. The way that worked previously is that towns would have to opt in. It would go through what is now the Community Investment Board. The regional future land use mapping process is identifying, it's a little difficult to read and see, but these from the downtown center to the village area. Yeah. All of those are eligible to be a center or a neighborhood. Those downtowns and village centers, including the ones that are already existing, will just be automatically brought in as a state designated center. So they will,
even if they're in Tier 2.
Even if they're in Tier 2. Yeah. So getting into the tier one areas a little bit more, I wanted I don't want to go too much in detail, but just because we've heard a lot of the concerns that have come up about these areas, and in particular, are they supporting our most rural and small towns? So I wanted to try to address some of those issues, and I guess just to go back for a second and say, maybe I have another graphic here somewhere. But the tools for our smallest towns is where we really need to be focused on a lot of the work, for example, that DHCD is leading related to missing middle housing. So how do we help build those units that are those duplexes, quadplexes? Act 250, it was previously, triggered for 10 units. Now it's going up to 50 units for those tier 1B areas. And that isn't really helping our smallest towns because they weren't getting those larger development projects anyway. So that's why I'm saying that we need to be focused our support for those smaller towns on these technical and financial assistance issues. Again, just as a reminder for what qualifies for tier 1B areas, the map, just to not be very confusing, the map is not of tier 1B areas, but is of towns that have a confirmed planning and local land use regulation on the books. They might not have both zoning and subdivision bylaws, which is a requirement of tier 1B.
But I can't read it. What is the pink and what's the?
So the pink is confirmed planning process and zoning or subdivision bylaws. The green is confirmed planning, but no land use regulation. So most towns in Vermont, almost every town has a town plan. Most towns in the pink have a plan and they have land use regulation, at least zoning and subdivision. Most have both. And then those in green are those that are kind of starting from a point where they don't have zoning. It would be a little bit more difficult for them to, in a short term, opt into tier 1B.
What are the black?
I don't know if that's just where they don't have data. That's a good question. Or they don't have a plan at all, but I would be surprised if it was that many.
I thought there were 90 towns that didn't have any zoning.
Yeah, that's what we've heard in other.
Oh, right, we talked. I have a really bad perception of space. So please understand that, but that does not look like green, 90 green towns.
So this is from DHCD's planning atlas.
Okay,
So I will double check that, but we'll get back to you.
Okay,
I'd appreciate that, thank you.
I've
Yes.
got a question too. When you say has water, wastewater, or adequate soils for development,
Yes.
is that any water, any wastewater? Or can it be partial water / wastewater?
So it's public water or wastewater. So it's not necessarily municipal water. It could be a private system that is publicly available. Or it could be that they don't have any existing system, but the soils in that area are, the way that the LURB has interpreted it is level 1 through 3 soil, so that they would accommodate a dense housing development if you were to put a community system in that area. Did I answer your
you mean a
question?
community septic
A
system?
community, yes.
What about an area that has some, but not complete? Like, does it count if it exists even one drop?
Right.
Or does it have to be a whole system?
I don't know.
I mean, I think it would have to be sufficient to serve whatever the growth density that, it's a practical issue.
Yeah.
So you'd have to show that there was capacity. You're talking about water when you say one drop, or?
I'm just saying that I'm just asking the question of the definition of water or wastewater, whether it has to be in whole or in part.
I think it's enough to serve whatever the remember, these are maps that are maps of growth. So I think you'd have to make the demonstration that there was enough either public or private water and sewer systems or the capacity in the soils to accommodate the density of growth that is being, proposed in the map. So, and that Blurb can analyze that and have a back and forth with the Regional Planning Commission, and the Regional Planning Commission works with the local planning commissions. They'd have to make that, show that information to the LURB, and then the maps would reflect where there was capacity to serve the growth that they are looking to facilitate. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Is
Joe.
there an overlap between prime ag soil and prime soil for septic systems?
I think that often the farm soils are work pretty well, and they could accommodate wastewater, so.
Everyone in the same pieces of land a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of, that's why you see, farms, they're very ripe for development, right? If the farmer wants to start farming, because they can.
They can perk.
But I think it's a matter of, it gets to the tiers and, where we want to grow, and yeah, I don't know how many farms there are, like in the tier 1 areas. There's probably many more in tier 2, and then tier 3 is actually not even fully focused on farmers. It's mostly tier 2. But, as we look at over time, the housing that gets developed, and if we need more housing, there'll be a discussion about expanding the areas, and it's important to preserve our prime ag soils. Do we want to expand out there? That would be, I guess, a debate that would occur.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is what you're thinking about, but I know that you heard testimony from the Land Access and Opportunity Board, who we really appreciated their work and have been coordinating with them. The issue of where there is prime ag soils in community centers where we might want to have something like community accessible farms like we have in Burlington, for example. That is a zoning issue, not something that's addressed at through Act 181 or the regional planning level. And so that, I think, is just an example of why it's still very important that these areas have zoning bylaws as to account for those types of issues.
Just so you guys know, we've allocated you until the hour.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm almost
So
done.
I think we probably, until 10.
So this is just an example. I chose Richford because I have a friend who just moved there, but just as an example of the change in scale. So on the left here is the historic village center with a 1/4-mile radius around it. On the right, same kind of scale, but you can see the pink area is that proposed tier 1B area is much more significant. I'm gonna skip through these. The darker blue color is the proposed tier 1B areas for the Northwest RPC where Richford is. And then again, just to kind of go back to the point of where for our more rural communities, we should really be focusing our energy is how do we support those multifamily units with lower number of units, those missing middle homes that we know we have a really high demand for, both for seniors who want to downsize, smaller families. Northwest has gotten a couple, and I think it makes sense then that you see this. A lot of their towns are looking for 1B areas. Just to show another example of Rutland's region, you have far less towns opting in to tier 1B. We've heard that there's a concern that not enough towns, or not as many towns as we would like, are opting into tier 1. We also want more towns to opt into tier 1, but I think that we don't need to, it's helpful to understand why they're not opting in. And so again, just as an example here in Rutland, there has been almost no development of multifamily homes in the county that are under 5 units. So again, they wouldn't necessarily be benefiting from that tier 1B area at this moment, whereas they would be benefiting from us investing in their capacity to build out the infrastructure or the other things that they would need to have greater housing.
So are you saying that it's not the cause there of not opting in is that even if they did, they can't build the housing because they don't have the infrastructure?
That's partly it. I've also heard some towns who are just in the process of updating their town plan or they're updating bylaws. So they want to do more community engagement. It is a relatively, again, going back to the difference in the trigger for Act 250, it's a pretty big difference in what communities have experienced before. So it makes sense. I think that many want to make sure that their communities are aware of what changes are being proposed and think really thoughtfully about what those boundaries are. So we should be encouraging them to opt into these areas. But yes, they might not be seeing those immediate benefits, even if they did. So I just don't want to put too much weight specifically on those tier 1 areas for much more rural towns. So I'm gonna jump ahead and hand it over to John because there are other things that we can do.
Thanks, Katie. So I really want to talk about a little bit, because I know you've heard about, so Act 181, as Katie said, it was a comprehensive update of Vermont's land use laws and really positive one, we think. And I think you've heard in testimony from across the spectrum that people do agree that it's really moving in the right direction. But it's really important to look at both all of the changes we made to planning in Act 250, and there's where do we want to grow, and this program that Katie described about encouraging growth, especially housing growth in areas based on good planning. But there were also conservation gaps in Act 250. And they're just equally important to the law. And those provisions are mostly found in, and I know you heard about this in the tier 3 areas, and the change, adding a criteria to Act 250 to protect intact forest areas and forest blocks, and a jurisdictional tool that is called the road rule. And those were all policies analyzed for years that, as I said, they were developed because there was identified gaps in Act 250. So there were flaws in Act 250 in terms of how we were applying it in growth areas and identifying growth areas. And as Katie said, we didn't have the land use map that was supposed to overlay Act 250 in the first place. And that map was supposed to do these very two things. It was supposed to say, where do we want to grow? And where do we really want to apply Act 250 and state resources? But where do we want conservation? And we want to be careful about growth. And we want to make sure that we preserve our wildlife habitat and our water quality. And when Act 250 was created, it was before climate change was really discussed. And what we've seen, over the last couple of decades is the impacts of climate change that have really made even more urgent looking at what are our critical natural resources, where there are gaps in protection, gaps in Act 250, gaps in ANR's programs. And I would venture to say that certainly if you talk to the ecologists at ANR, in addition to, environmental experts, not just VNRC, but the Nature Conservancy and Audubon, that there are just gaps that, in 1970 we didn't really address. And so, there's a tier 1 process is going on, but also there is a process that you heard to identify tier 3 resources. So that has been a robust process. VNRC has been a stakeholder along with dozens of other entities. And we, made a lot of progress. I think the law identified 10 to 12 potential critical natural resources for protection to fill that gap in protection that we have. And the Land Use Review Board has really zeroed on 3 resources: habitat connectors, significant natural areas, and headwaters, and has begun the process of trying to kind of map out those areas to determine how would you draw maps to fill those protection gaps and protect those critical natural resources? And that process
It's
is
headwaters, natural areas, what's the third?
habitat connect.
Yeah.
And that process is ongoing and it's been slower than the law required, I think, by February 1st, a couple of weeks from now, for a rule to be filed with LCAR identifying these tier 3 resources and the jurisdictional maps. And we're just not ready for that. And DNRC agrees, like, it just takes time to do this the right way. We want to get it right. I think there's been a lot of misconception in the public, and it's just because this is very new and it is complicated and it's in flux. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what the tier 3 areas are going to be, what the jurisdictional triggers are going to be, how is this going to work. So we agree, we need more time. I think the LURB is asked to push back the filing a final rule with the LPAR to September 1st, and we support that. And as I said, I think it is working, the process. I think it's, we've had some really interesting and difficult and complicated discussions at times, from business groups to environmental groups to the state scientists who are really guiding the process with data and information. But we do need more time. But in the end, I'm confident that we're going to end up with a rule that is not going to affect where we want to build dense housing. It's not going to affect people who reasonably want to build housing on land that is going to be well outside of the tier 1 areas. But the goal of tier 3 is not to prevent people from building developments on their land to accommodate a house or 2 or 3 or whatever, anything like that. So I just would ask for patience from the committee and letting this process play out. And I agree, the law was pretty aggressive in thinking that by February 1st of this year that we would have it all done. Similarly, we're working on developing that forest protection criteria, which was a significant gap in Act 250. There's no criteria in Act 250 that deals with forest protection per se. And we're seeing more stress on our forests, both through climate change, but also we've seen demographic shifts, and we're going to continue to see them. And these planning processes hopefully will get us the housing stock that we need in sustainable communities in the way Katie and other people who are expert land use planners have identified, but also make sure that we protect, what's special about Vermont. Forests sequester carbon, forests help slow floodwaters. This is I think the smartness of the Act 181 change is filling these gaps and doing both of these things at the same time. And again, the new criteria is not even, you have to trigger jurisdiction of Act 250 to have the criteria even apply to you. And the intent is having good planning and site design, even for, single family homes being built in these areas, even though that's not really going to solve the housing crisis in terms of the density and the type of developments we don't have, the multifamily, more dense developments. But we still, if you're in these critical resource areas or you're trigger Act 250 and there are issues around forest health, that you address those issues. And then lastly, the road rule is really just another tool to make sure that we're not seeing, long roads going deep into especially forest areas and harming forest health and fragmenting forests. The road rule, the statute, Act 181, authorized the Land Use Review Board to either issue guidance about the road rule or a rule to say how the road rule would work. The LURB decided to go with guidance. They proposed some guidance. They're still working through it. It's very preliminary. I think it was just really kind of made public a few weeks ago. They had a meeting yesterday about it, and they raised some ideas, and they're going to result in, I think, some changes to the guidance. And the LURB identified a number of issues with regard to how the road rule will work. The big issue with the road rule is defining a road versus a driveway in terms of the trigger. And I don't want to get too deep. I don't know how much you know about the details of the road rule or how much you want to know. Like, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole if you want me to, but I'm happy to. But, basically it's really important how we define what the jurisdictional trigger is going to be. And we don't know what it is, how it's going to work yet. because the LURB really, they need to, in guidance or a rule, really set forth how this is gonna work when Act 250 is triggered. But what I do feel confident in saying is that at the end of the day, the guidance is gonna result in only long roads that are fragmenting forests that are gonna be pulled into Act 250. And really, the goal is to have good site design and to avoid those impacts, not to prevent or preclude development or housing development on parcels. You know, you could build, I think at the end of the day, if you have a driveway, how that gets defined, you could have a 1,999 foot driveway serving, you know, one house, and you wouldn't trigger Act 250. You know, I'm confident in saying that's not going to be what the road rule is not going to require like an 800-foot road to one house, a driveway rather. See, I made a mistake myself, to trigger Act 250. But those are the issues we're working out. VNRC supports taking the time to do that. We don't want to rush this. We want to get it right. We understand the public has concerns, and it's hard to follow all of this, and they're really important issues because it affects how we live on the land. But that's where we are right now, and I think the process is working, and we just need more time to get through it.
Question for you. We've heard, first of all, does the road rule is there a date at which it becomes effective?
July 1st, 2026. This
Right.
July.
Do you think that should be extended?
I think I want to see, I think we have to really, if the LURB is not making, you know, so we were sitting here basically mid-January and the guidance is very nascent. So if we can't get the guidance together, I think we have to have a conversation about how to deal with that.
A minute.
Go ahead.
Mark's or Chair stole part of my question. He's a mind reader, I heard. That was part of my question. And then next part is it too early for either of you to say what a timeline might look like, or you just really want to gather more, like, but you know, just, I'm not saying this personally, but others might say, and maybe I am, I don't know. Others are just that we continue to keep, so do you have a timeline where, you know, because if we just leave loose ends, like, do you have like, I know you can't, like, you don't have a magic 8 ball to see how, but do you have kind of a?
Yeah, I mean, I think for tier 3, I mean, the LURB is saying September. I think that makes sense. Maybe it needs to be a little longer than that, but no sooner than that. We support that. I think with the road rule, I think, I just want to talk to some of my colleagues, but I definitely want to get it right. And I listened to the LURB to talk about the road rule just yesterday. They had a meeting and they're at the beginning. They're talking about what are the triggers, how do you define a road or a driveway? What are the triggers going to be? And there are lots of different ideas. I was telling Katie this morning, ideas that I'd never even thought of before. I mean, it was interesting, but that shows you that it's still early. If we need more, I think in a couple of months, and when the legislature is still here, we'll have a better handle on like a date that we could pick. But we're supportive of we don't want to rush this through. We definitely.
So maybe we'll circle back. I do know that just because I'm nerdy and read all the bills, in both House and Senate, there will be, I don't know if they'll move, but there's different legislation being proposed around the road rule that I read, some different things, but so it sounds like we'll circle back after we.
I would appreciate it, and yeah, we just want to create context. We're aware of the different proposals, and
I'm sure.
you know, the point I'm trying to convey is we want to get this right, but these are important provisions that are equally important in terms of our planning process that we amended in Act 180.
No, I understand, and I appreciate you're not
Yeah.
just saying
Yeah.
that you just want to take.
Yeah,
Tom?
So could you clarify the road rule in this respect? So say there's an 810-foot road. There's going to be a house and an accessory dwelling at the end of that,
A driveway.
depending on how they.
Yeah.
right. I
And
think
now
that-
if, however whatever criteria they finally arrive at, let's say that triggers an application process for Act 250. Is the Act 250 permit for the road? Or is it for the road and the housing?
No, it would be for the development that,
For the-
serve, yeah.
Okay.
But I think I want to stress that that was the point I was trying to make. I don't think that, an 800-foot, I think it would be a driveway serving a house and an ADU and a wooden trigger. I think that's one of the questions, is should it be serving two or more houses, three or more houses? You know, how many? Those are sort of the considerations. I do think that there is also a discussion that is happening in tier 3 as well. So it's not only the mapped area, but then, kind of drawing a line around the footprint, like what are you taking jurisdiction of, like if it really is affecting a resource. So those conversations are part of it. Like what are the resources at play, and you take jurisdiction if you're not, in an area ultimately where there is intact forest or habitat resources. I think those ideas are being played, certainly in the tier 3 context, is like, we don't want to take jurisdiction for jurisdiction's sake. We're doing this to protect these critical natural resources.
You don't need
So-
to necessarily go through the entire Act 250.
Right, maybe not all the criteria would apply, depending, so there's all kind of issues that are being discussed to try to narrow in on what we're trying to protect and what the limits of the review would be. Because the idea is to protect those resources, but also to encourage avoidance, right? If you could do a 600-foot or, if let's say, let's change your hypothetical to 810 feet serving four lots, right? The idea, could you make that road a little shorter, and then you'd avoid Act 250, right? Or something like that, right? So that's sort of the goal of this, one of the goals. Yeah.
Because the goal is not really the design of the road, the goal is how far.
Yeah, the development that will, be in areas where there are, these critical natural resources, and especially intact forest areas. The road rule statute mentions forest fragmentation really as the resource in question that is the reason why we want to look at these longer roads, going into these areas. And and mostly, so it's however the road ever ends up being defined, it's 800 feet, but if it's a drive, otherwise it's 2,000 feet of cumulative roads and driveways, which is a lot, that's a lot to trigger that becomes a larger development, obviously.
John, we're almost out of time, but I'm just trying to understand what you just said. Are you saying that under consideration now is the possibility that someone with a long driveway, more than 800 feet, that they might not have to go through Act 250 we might end up in a place where they don't have to go through Act 250 if they're simply not implicating a critical resource area?
Potentially, certainly in tier 3, that's been a big part of the conversation. What's the footprint, of some of the development? Is there a de minimis, or under a certain size of a footprint where the risks are not so great that you would still need to take Act 250 jurisdiction? But this is why we need more time.
Yeah, and we'd have to figure out
Yeah.
who decided that.
Well, right, yeah, right now it's in the hands of the LURB.
Yeah, right, yeah. Anything else? Any final questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much. for your
hopefully
time.
helpful, and please have us back as these questions arise if you find it helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness, after which we will take a break before we have our 11 o'clock security briefing, is Dominic Cloud. Welcome, Dominic. Yeah. Dominic, what I would suggest is I'll explain sort of what's going on here, and then we'll introduce ourselves to you because you haven't been before us. And then you can introduce yourself and take it away. All right? Can you hear us? We can't hear you. Let's make sure we can hear you. we still can't hear you. Is there anything on our end that's a problem? What?
Just Debbie to speak, so it's not a speaker issue.
Uh. Hey Debbie, could you say something so we make sure it's not a speaker issue on our end? Dominic, we can't hear you. Oh, you can hear us, but we can't hear you? Yeah, no, you're muted. Or for us, you're muted. Do you think there's a way for you to unmute yourself? I think that testimony wouldn't work if we can't hear you since we're not lip readers. Um. Do we have a way of testing our own speakers?
He's gonna rejoin, that's a good
He's gonna
idea.
rejoin, yeah.
So you'll unplug it and plug it back in?
Yeah,
Blowing it.
the best there is.
No, just unplug it.
The best is when you
This
get to
isn't a
pick it.
Nintendo.
It could be.
The best is when you can.
I have seen IT people, T-shirts that say, turn it on, turn it off,
That's right,
turn it on.
reboot.
Reboot.
Hello, we still can't hear you.
Let's see, how about now, Dominic?
No.
Any better?
Yep.
Oh, there we
All right,
go.
there you are. You might turn it up a little.
Turn it up.
Or can we turn it up here? Try again, Dominic, say something. Hello, whatever.
Sure. Is that any better?
That's
Perfect.
great, perfect. So what's going on here is that we have the the General and Housing Committee has been holding an initial, we just started our session last week. And so we've been holding an initial set of hearings on, given the legislation that we've passed, what's working, what isn't, and what should we do in the future? What direction should we take? And we thought we might, among other things, want to hear from a city manager from outside of Chittenden County, which is certainly you, and your name came up. And why don't I have our committee introduce itself? Tom, you want to start with you?
I'm Tom Charlton. I represent Athens, Chester, Grafton, and Wyndham.
Joe Parsons, nice to have you in here today.
Eudora Dodge from Essex Town in the city of Essex Junction. Hello.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax in Georgia, so your neighbor, real close.
And I'm Mark Mahaly, and I represent kind of in the middle of the state, Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield.
Excellent.
I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland City District 6.
I'm Gail Pezzo and I represent Chittenden 20 in Colchester.
And we have a couple of others who are going to join us possibly during your testimony, but we'll see. But we do have a quorum, so we're going to proceed. So take it away. Tell us who you are for the record and what your thoughts are.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning. Nice to be with you all. My name is Dominic Cloud. I'm the city manager in St. Albans. And for the last 15 years, we've been actively engaged in community-led redevelopment with a particular focus on housing. As we were emerging from the pandemic, it became clear that housing was a critical piece of infrastructure. Housing was infrastructure, and if we were going to grow our population and grow our tax base, we needed to participate directly in the development process. And so, while planning and regulation, traditional governmental roles are defensive strategies that can shape and stop projects, we needed to really go on the offensive and participate in the development process in order to get the projects that the community envisioned. And so I've got some slides that I think can tell a really great story about some live projects. And demonstrate some of the things that are working, some lessons that we've learned, and what might be emerging issues for the future. And I think the outcomes, really speak for themselves. The city set a goal of doing 200 housing units within 5 years. We're not at the 5-year mark, but we are right now we're at about 189. We're on track to hit 300. And we're having a conversation of what's the new target? Is it 400 or 500? So with all due humility, imagine if communities across the state were adding 500 housing units. We'd have a different Vermont. So let me show you some slides and tell you some stories. This is always the hardest part.
Just so you know, if you need help, you can get it here.
Thank you. How's that? You've seen
Well,
some-
what we see is we see both. Is there a way we see just a larger?
Yeah, you can make it full screen. Like
You want to make it full screen because at the moment, half the screen is you. As
Okay.
much as we enjoy your wonderful face, it means that your slide is kind of small.
Usually takes me a little longer to be asked to leave the room.
Oops. Now we don't see. Yes,
How's that?
perfect.
Okay. Excellent. So this was our first project. There, I'm having trouble advancing.
There we go.
Okay. Buildings are important elements of branding and identity for communities. This is the St. Albans House, which is located in downtown St. Albans. Had a rich history as a saloon, as a brothel, and transitional housing. It was, as I often say, the first mixed-use building. But it fell into disrepair, and because it was literally called the St. Albans House, it became a symbol of decline, a symbol of the fact that we were a community that was eroding, not growing. And so I toured every developer in northwestern Vermont through this building. I was a new city manager, and none of them would touch it. Even with a long time horizon, there was no way this project made sense. The redevelopment costs were too high, the rents were too low, the risk was too high, and the return was negligible. And then I met a guy who had some experience with the state and federal historic tax credits. And he was close to making a pro forma work, but he needed a little bit of help. And the city had an old redevelopment fund with a couple $100,000 in it. And I said to him, well, how about if we gave you $50,000 to fix up the outside and we lent you another 100, and you only paid interest for the first 5 years, and then at 5 years, there'd be a takeout. Would you do the project? And he said, well, let me call my wife. And lo and behold, he called me back later that night and said, yeah, we have a deal. And that's how the St. Albans redevelopment model was born. That's what it looks like today. It's fully leased up. It's got commercial space on the first floor, office on the second, and the balance is all residential market rate units. Now we would call it workforce housing. The building was worth about $50,000, mostly for the land value at the moment. We had it on the grand list for 75 or so. That's what he paid for it. And today it's worth $1.3 million in the recent reappraisal. So it started at 75,000. As I mentioned, we gave him 50, lent him 100. He borrowed 866. The state and federal historic tax credits are really important. That's real money when you partner with a bank. And along the way, you know, and it's in hindsight many times that you realize what you're doing in life, but along the way, we realized this is how we can do community-driven economic development with a focus in particular on the type of housing that we envision. We put skin in the game. We share risk. We participate in the development process. And we measure our returns both qualitatively and quantitatively. This was a big lift in year one for us. It was 150,000 at a time when the community was in crisis. But it was the first time we got some points on the board and showed that the city council and the city staff could accomplish some things. And the voters began to give us even more authority and expect more from us. Few years went by, we were able to obtain a tax increment finance district. And an opportunity emerged right on Main Street. This was the view out my window at the time. It's actually right behind me as I speak today. This is the Congress in Main project. And at Congress in Main, we realized that there was significant redevelopment potential if we could assemble these lots, demolish the buildings that were on site, recruit developers. There were 2 different developers that participated in this site. And we could do a combination of a commercial building on the front of the site on Main Street and 2 residential buildings in the back of the site. And the city would own and operate the parking in the middle. There's about 90 spaces that could be accommodated there. And if we owned and operated it in common, all that development could happen. And so that was the vision that we came up with. On the north part of the top part of your screen there is Main Street, was the commercial building. If you look closely, you can see how that building cantilevers over the parking underneath it. The bottom of your screen is 70 units of housing, 35 deeply subsidized and operated by the Champlain Housing Trust. On the left side of the screen is another 35 units of workforce housing, which is leased at area median income wages to predominantly young professionals in the community. So that's a picture of the affordable housing. Right next to it is the market rate housing. There's the commercial building on Main Street. It's got an award-winning restaurant on the first floor, Northwestern Medical Center on the top, and CCV in the middle. And these are the numbers. It was about $1.4 million to start. We put 2.5 in tax increment financing. It's analogous today to the CHIP program. But that's never enough. You always need additional funding sources. And so the city brought together another $4.5 million from other sources. So you see that capital stack gets pretty large there. 35 units of low to moderate income housing, 35 units of workforce housing, 20,000 square feet of office and restaurant. And today it's worth $10.5 million. That's only possible with some of the tools that the legislature has provided. And I would argue that it's only possible when you have a community-driven approach to housing development like St. Albans has developed. The returns aren't strong enough. The risks are too great for a private developer to take this on by themselves. And so it's our belief and experience you can do bigger projects faster with greater certainty when the community takes the lead. A current project is the Fonda redevelopment project.
Sorry, the what?
Foundry.
Foundry? Okay,
Fonda, Fonda.
Fonda.
yeah.
And Fonda was a large paper manufacturer. Many of us have direct experience with this company because they made the red Solo cup that you might have encountered in college. Uh, They pulled out of St. Albans and left us with 120,000 square foot vacant brownfield with high demolition costs. And so the city had to consider not just the cost of doing something, but what are the costs of doing nothing? And this building was another symbol of a community in decline. When you drive by that every day and the windows get boarded up, and it begins to fall down and people start vandalizing it, et cetera. We all have buildings like that. That spreads. So the city bought it. We bought it way back in the Obama administration. And we didn't yet know what we were going to do with it. And I think that's an appropriate exercise for a community. So I often say, you can always sell it, you can't always buy it. And so we bought it for $350,000. We paid for that with our short-term borrowing. Every city has significant short-term borrowing relationships with their local bank, or can easily establish that. Banks like to diversify their investment pool with a taxable entity such as the city. That means an entity with a tax authority. And eventually we put together a vision to do 120 units of housing there. And so one of our housing philosophies and practices is we follow a housing for all approach. We don't have to have every deal have everything in it. But when we're doing a large deal like this, or like Congress in Maine, communities are built with a diversity of housing. And your housing partners have different strengths. Your nonprofit, more deeply subsidized partners can bring more cash to the table on day one. But those buildings are usually worth about half as much. Your market rate developers can bring less cash to the table on day one, but those buildings are usually worth twice as much. And so here we envisioned, in broad strokes, about 35 units of mixed income senior housing. And we approached Cathedral Square for a partnership there. And we envisioned another 85 or so units of market rate workforce housing that was responding to what our employers were telling us they needed. Housing for nurses, housing for the workers in the industrial park, housing for the new expansion that Beta Technologies is doing at the former Energizer plant. So this is a 5-acre site that would have languished for years without the city buying it, and it languished too long because the city took too many incremental steps. In my opinion, one of the lessons I've learned here is get the buildings down sooner rather than later. And the Cathedral Square senior housing portion came together fairly quickly. That building is up, fully leased, very successful. We did one, and we're talking with them about doing another. But what makes the project work is the market rate units. Remember, they're worth twice as much. That's what provides the increment to service the debt. And that's been tougher to bring to the table. The city is offering to the development community free land, fully cleaned of all environmental contaminants, with the city willing to assume the ongoing responsibility for any environmental issues that might emerge. No water and sewer fees or any other upfront costs. And we've secured $10 million in LIAC funding through the Treasurer's Office and the partnership with the legislature and VHFA. And it still hasn't been enough to get this across the goal line, because in large part, nobody is yet building market rate residential units outside of Chittenden County. So the banks have some trepidation, and we've had trouble getting our capital stack, our funding stream through the agencies that are lending the money. We've been shovel ready for a year, but we're still having trouble getting to closing on this project. I'm confident we're going to get there this year, but with every year, the increment that gets generated is worth less. The same is true with the CHIP program. You can only retain increment for a limited time period. So literally, in a public-private partnership that's relying on the creation of increment to service debt, time is money. But we're going to get there. I think we'll be breaking ground on this summer. This will be 40-odd units in phase one and another 40-odd in phase two. Is that a question?
No, sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right.
But I have a question here. So just to clarify for the committee, when you say that the increment is kind of there's fewer years, I assume what you're referring to is that when the tax increment district was created, it had a lifetime, and any bonds that would be issued would have to be within that lifetime, and that as time goes by, that lifetime gets, we're more further into the lifetime. Is that the case?
That's exactly correct. And just to drill down a little bit, your retention period is 20 years. Your debt issuance period is 10 years. And the further you go into the life of your district, you have a shorter time horizon to generate increment. And so we're at about year 12 or 13. And so when projects slip further out into that retention period, they get less and less viable. So there's a incentive and practical reality to get it done now, which I like programmatically. There's a saying in the business, time kills all deals. And so we have a housing crisis. We want the program to be structured to get it done and get it done now. But it's just important that all of our partners and everybody at the table realize, we really need to be acting with a sense of urgency, both from a policy perspective and a practical perspective.
So just to conclude this point, what you're saying is when you started the TIF district, it had a life of 20 years, meaning that the tax increment, the increment between what it was worth as that old building and the new value, potential new value, the retention period is the period in which you are allowed to retain that increment and keep it out of the education fund, keep it out of the general tax of the town, and devote it to this redevelopment area. That is 20 years, and we're already how far into that?
We're at about year 13 or so.
Yeah, 13. Now, in terms of your bond authorization, it's 10 years, but you can't even use the 10 years because you've only got 7 left.
Not quite. That's close. The last bit, your state retention period is 20 years, but you can go beyond that period on the municipal side if need be.
That is
Not on the ed.
not on the ed side, but the municipal side.
Correct.
Okay. So in fact, so that's why you figure you can issue $1 million in tax increment finance, but not more for this big deal because you just can't do it because of those limitations.
100%. That's
Okay.
exactly it.
Thank you.
Sure. And 7 years of increment is still a powerful tool, and it triples your taxing capacity overnight, and it can only be used for this purpose. So, 10's better than 8, but 8's better than nothing. So, but here's how this deal, shapes up then. Starts out at about 350,000 in an original taxable value. We put $1 million of TIF funds into it. We brought another 5 million to the table. And, you know, so in round numbers here, it's a 5-acre site. We got 6 million in public investment. It's north of a million an acre to get this development ready. And those are all sunk costs, you know, so we need to get this thing across the goal line. And I and our team takes the responsibility to create increment very seriously. You know, it's a generational opportunity. It's a gift, you know, from the state of Vermont. Our obligation is to go get it done. And this is a real flagship project, ultimately. You see the senior housing developers put in 19 million. Market rate developer is going to put in a little, that project's going to cost a little bit more than that. All told, we're going to have 120 units of senior mixed and market rate housing. We had 100, you know, previously we had 120,000 square foot vacant warehouse worth 350. Now we're going to have 120 units of housing for all with a projected taxable value of 25 million. That's a good day at the office. That's a good return on investment. That's what CHIP is about, and that's what TIF's about. What's working is the underlying infrastructure, the TIF part and the CHIP part. Where we're having trouble is some of the transactional details, the more process-oriented items of getting the money out the door. Here's our next project, which has been on hold until we got Fonda under construction. When the Fonda project leases up, and I can go to the development community and say, well, those 45 units that were built in year one leased up in 4 months, everybody gets more comfortable. You know, some of you live in northwestern Vermont. I don't think there's a huge difference in what people are able and willing to pay for rents in northwestern Vermont. It's a quick shot down the interstate to jobs outside of the county. There's a lot of great jobs in the county. For all intents and purposes, all of us along the interstate are one marketplace. But the banks don't always see it that way. There's still more risk developing in Franklin County. The further you get from exit 14, the harder you need to lean into a project. So this is our next project, but I can't bring this one to the market until I get the bird in the hand taken care of, which is Fonda. So if you've been to St. Albans lately, you'll see this building hulking over Main Street with my name on it. This is the former Bellevue building, which has been deteriorating for 15 years.
What's the building?
It's known locally as the Bellevue. Originally it housed the Bellevue Theater. And so, you know, it's another symbol of decline. What's the cost of that hulking over Main Street? What's the impact on all the surrounding businesses? So the city bought this. We've issued the debt through the bond bank for redeveloping it into a housing project. We intend to demolish the building, build the structured parking underneath this building, and complete all of the environmental remediation and build new parking to serve not just this building, but the other buildings around it. And that's what we envision that the new building is going to look like. And so we anticipate a very similar conversation to Fonda with this. Fonda, remember, is viable because of the infusion of LIAC funds. There's no LIAC on this one. And so,
LIAC, just for the committee.
Sure.
LIAC is referring to, remember, the treasurer can invest 10% of his total assets. Well, he's investing less than
Holdings,
that
yeah.
in real estate at very low percentages.
Right.
And LIAC is just the name of the committee, the treasurer's committee, which Maura sits on, and
Right.
Alex,
Why
yeah.
is this not eligible?
LIAC is the name of the committee that awards the funds. So when he says LIAC funds, he's referring to the treasurer's
Right.
money.
It would be a great candidate if there was more money. But that program, you know, is obligated. And if I were to deliver one message, I would say, I think we spend a lot of time talking about permits and infrastructure, and all of that's really important. But what is still killing deals is the cost of capital. And that's what we're experiencing in all of our projects now, is these projects are viable when money's at 3%. When money's twice that, they're not viable. And so, you know, that's a forecast on the future that I think we might be having conversations with policymakers like yourself as the CHIP program gets underway, that I think we may have conversations about it's still not enough because the cost of capital is killing deals. And so that ability to access capital, that's something that the city, and you go back to our initial example with the St. Albans house, putting money into deals and then having it at our cost, which is about half the cost of a private developer, and then having that money come back to us at a later date. That's a time-tested tool that uses our ability to access capital, which is very different than direct grants or any of the other solutions. This is a current project that we're working on. We're going to demolish the building and go to the marketplace in this year's construction season. And just wrapping up here, this is what St. Albans looked like in 2012. If you read our planning documents at the time, it would describe us as the center of business and commerce for Franklin County. But nobody would want to do any business or any commerce here if they could help. And 4 years later, this is what it looked like. There's a brand new office building, which is fully leased to the state of Vermont. The legislature and the Shumlin administration was a key player in that deal. It's a brand new hotel, Hampton Inn, right there on Lake Street. There's a 350 space parking garage, and the whole area has been streetscaped. That was about 12 million in public investment. You're looking at about 20 million in private increment right there that helps pay for it. And so that's how we can do dramatic change quickly, by the tools that you provide. And I come from a clear place ideologically that I think when communities lead it, you get there faster with greater certainty, and you get better projects because the community is taking the lead. It's not the only way to do it. A lot of CHIP programs are going to be small deals, developer-led, where the community is only saying, yes, we will sign off on the agreement and allow your tax increment to pay for the infrastructure. But our experience is you get more bang from the buck when the community puts more skin in the game. And so I'd welcome any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful short course in redevelopment for the committee. I really appreciate the concrete nature of your testimony. It is very, very helpful. Do members of the committee have questions, Dominic? Tom?
Sure. If you have any specific insights as to what could be done to shorten, and I know it differs from every project in locale, to shorten the time period between starting the tax increment financing and actually breaking ground. Because it sounds like that is something that could potentially limit the usefulness of the CHIP program.
Yeah.
That gap concerns me. And if there are specific ideas, you know, if there are clear things you can isolate that would close that gap in general.
Sure.
Useful.
there's a tendency in all that to focus on permit reform, Let's Build Homes is going to have, I'm sure, some proposals in that realm. Not taking anything away from those policy efforts. My experience is the best, and I'm going to repeat my theme here, is to encourage the community to put more skin in the game. Not every community is going to want to do that. And a thing we often hear when we give this talk around the state is, well, we don't have a dominant cloud. Well, I didn't know anything about commercial real estate development when I became the city manager. And I still know about as much of it as I know about wastewater treatment design or defending the city in court, which is I know who to call. So you don't need to be an expert. But when the community steps up and creates the vision, sells the vision, and offers the voters a chance to weigh in on the vision, you get fewer appeals. Everything I showed you, none of those projects have ever been appealed. It's one thing to stand out in front of a project with a private developer, mission-driven or otherwise. Something else to stand out in front of a project that the elected leaders of the community say is important and that the voters have supported 3-1. And that's been our experience. The last thing in terms of shortening that gap is many of our affordable housing our housing development pathways are really focused around affordable housing. And they're tremendously successful. They've got a great track record. Where we struggle is when we start trying to expand beyond affordable housing into workforce housing and market rate housing. And we don't yet have the pathways yet for that process to be as smooth as it can. And they're really different animals. An affordable housing project and the return on investment and the level of equity that's contributed from the investors is really different than a market rate project. CHIP has a market rate component to it, and it's the market rate projects that pay for everything else. Remember, they're worth twice as much. And so we need to figure out how to have that process be as smooth as possible.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I'll just add my own experience. What Dominic described to you was my life for 2 decades in California. And what I learned is very much the same as what he is saying, which is that public-private partnerships really work well because there are things that government can do that the public-private sector just can't. But there are really important things that the private sector can do that the public sector can't. And the trick is to design projects which play to the strengths of each party. And very often, one of the problems is the private sector for them, their return has to relate to the risk. The higher the risk, the higher the return. Otherwise, they'll never get anybody to invest. No one would invest. Believe me, you have to be a little nuts to be a developer. And none of us, if someone said to you, would you invest your own personal money in this? How much would you have to make? You'd say 20% or, some outlandish number. So the problem in Vermont, and it's not unique here, is that rents that people can afford are not high enough to create that level of return given the risk. And so government has to step in and inject certainty, inject capital, inject land, whatever the government can do to reduce the risk so that a lower return is acceptable and the project, as we say, pencils out. And that's, you heard three or four different versions of that and how that works here.
Well put, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions of Dominic? Yes.
Not a question, just a thank you from somebody in your county. I remember a few years ago, I was very pregnant. And I told my mom we were going trick or treating with my oldest in St. Albans. And I had to move the phone away from my ear because she was so mad and frightened because of her idea of what St. Albans used to be. And it's truly changed to such a beautiful, lovely community. It is the best place to go trick or treating. Please don't tell Fairfax that. But just really, I commend you for the work that you've done and your entire team.
Thank you. I remember that fear.
Okay. Dominic, thank you very much.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
your being with us, and we may want you back for something. Thank you.
Anytime. Have a good one.
Okay, all right. We have the security briefing nominally at 11. Given that it might be a good idea for them to come 5 minutes earlier, do you think that's possible or not? Probably not?
Probably not,
Okay.
but I can ask.
Why don't we go offline? What's going to happen is we're going to have, before we go offline for the public, we're having a security briefing here, and for fairly obvious reasons, that briefing has to be confidential. It's going to discuss issues which are best not public, so we're not going to live stream the period when that briefing is given to us. This is between 11 and 12. We will reconvene at 1 o'clock with a number of bills that are being introduced. And their sponsors will be talking to us. And that will start at 1. So now we're adjourned until, not adjourned, we are